Hey kittens and cats, welcome back to the show. Still trying to keep this thing monthly. It's been a while though. I think it's been about 6 weeks. I want to do at least one of these a month. But sometimes during the summer, especially when I'm traveling, it can be a challenge finding a nice little spot to sit down, a little cubby hole, and just talk at you, with you, for you. Now, I am in southern Germany right now, and it was interesting. I was trying to decide, what did I want to talk about this time? I'm not going to do a pre-written story. Those are coming again in the fall, by the way. The episodes that are pre-written and set to music and have a very specific story to tell. But as far as these freestyle ones, I'd like to go for long walks and see what comes into the brain pan, see what settles in the heart, and if it feels right, if I get a little tingle, if the hairs stand up, if I get a sigh, then I know this is what I should talk about next. Now, I was wandering around this tiny town in the south here near the Swiss border. It's a town called Pfullendorf. It starts with a P, but the P is silent. Oh, you Germans. And I'm standing at the street corner thinking about the podcast, and I look up at the light to see if it's ready to cross yet, because you have to follow the rules in Germany. You cannot just jaywalk. People will yell at you. I've had that happen before. I've jaywalked in Germany, Berlin, and Hamburg, and I've had mothers and people pushing their children in strollers yelling at me for setting a bad example for their children. I wouldn't want to be that guy again. So yeah, I look up at this pole with the light on it, and I see a sticker on the pole, and the sticker is blue with a yellow emblem. And it took me a second because there was that moment of familiarity and recognition, and that yellow shape, the emblem, the symbol on the blue square sticker was that of the clamshell, the lines divided from a base fanning out, the clamshell symbol of the Camino Santiago, the Santiago de Compostela, the way of St. James. Now, those of you who have listened to my show before know from one of the Q&As and a few other things that I've talked about that the Way of St. James, the Camino Santiago, the Santiago de Compostela, this epic pilgrimage or hike across Spain, was a real game changer for me, a life changer, in fact. And seeing the symbol of this walk and realizing that, yes, I had met people on this walk who were from different parts of Europe, who had started the walk even further away from Spain or southern France and gone all the way to the end on the west coast of Spain. It was a big deal for them, and it's a huge part of the culture here, especially if you're in a town that has any sort of kind of religious base, if you're in a town that has a Catholic contingent or a fervent Christian contingent. This Camino Santiago means something to them. A little bit of backstory on this hike, on this magical walk, on this historic journey. I'll give a bit of backstory on myself and a bit of backstory on the walk itself. It's a really interesting history surrounding it. The fact that, okay, if I remember correctly, there were the Knights Templar came down from the Catholic Church into Spain to kind of set up a base of operations to expand from the Holy Land and expand the Christian Empire and the gospel. And these were holy knights, and they were coming down to defend the region, and also kind of to put a line in the sand against the Moors, against the North African Muslims who were moving up and expanding territory. And so, of course, the Christians wanted to say, okay, this is where you'll stop. We're going to take this territory. But the problem was, as they spread out across Spain and southern France, the problem was they didn't have enough people. They knew that they couldn't hold the land for long. So apparently, a decree came down from the Catholic Church, this is the rumor, and that they said, they spread throughout the land, throughout Europe and far and wide, that any faithful person, any Christian who walked this trail from southern France and beyond, through the Pyrenees Mountains, over the Pyrenees Mountains, and to the west of Spain, to the town and now city of Santiago, they would be forgiven all of their sins. The reason why is that the bones of St. James were apparently being held in this town, Santiago. And so the bones would bless you if you walked all that way, if you took the perilous 800-plus kilometer journey, or more if you were coming further into Europe, to Western Spain. If you walked all that way, that your sins would be forgiven. And you might be like, well, that's fine, yeah, but who would do that? Who would risk their lives, especially in the winter and the heat and the harshness of summer? Who would do that? Well, guess what? When you believe so deeply, so fully in something, especially in the Middle Ages. Because I think the Knights Templar came down around the year 800 and started settling in the area. So when it's back in an area of angry Father God, and you just wanted to do right, and you were poor, and you had done some bad things, this whole decree from the church was basically like, you could be a murderer, you could be a rapist, you could be a blasphemer, you could do the worst things imaginable in humankind. But if you made this walk, you wouldn't go to hell. You would be forgiven in the eyes of the church, and more importantly, in the eyes of God. So, over 1,200 years, millions of pilgrims did this journey, usually in flat leather sandals with their donkeys and all their possessions, with their families, and with basic robes and clothing, walking through over the Pyrenees, even in the dead of winter, going across the Mesetas in the center of Spain, even in 50 degrees Celsius summers, to try to make it to the end. Many died. Many did not make it, but many others settled along the journey and built towns between southern France and western Spain. And so this gave the Catholic Church, over many centuries, it helped to build up the population of believers, of Christians, and eventually helped to dominate Spain as a Christian nation. Now, flash forward, because that has nothing to do with me, but what does have something to do with me was I was 18 years old. It was around my birthday, so it was around this time of year. And so, I'm dating myself, but 30 years ago. And I'm in the basement at home. It's a Sunday night. It's nice outside. My parents are out gardening or something, and I had no desire to be out there. I'd just been playing video games or watching something trashy on TV. But it was Sunday, and believe it or not, I was actually a fan of 60 Minutes, of that news broadcast program where they would do 3 or 4, serious stories from around the world. This is pre-internet times, so you got your news where you could get your news, and 60 Minutes was a cool way to get more in-depth stories. And this story came on, I think it was the second feature of that Sunday night. And it was about a resurgence of interest in this sacred walk, this sacred pilgrimage in Spain. And I was looking at this footage, this beautiful footage of people with backpacks in small groups with the symbol of the clamshell on their pack, or they're walking with wooden staffs, and they're going over the mountains and into deep valleys. They're walking through Pamplona with the running of the bulls. They're entering these gorgeous cities like Burgess and Leon, and then they're in farmland and going through olive groves and fruit orchards and vineyards. And they're walking across Spain trying to capture some magic and relive this moment. Many of them were people of faith, but many of them were just people who had a yearning for something greater, for an adventure, for a deeper connection maybe with themselves and the land. And it showed these people just so full of happiness and pride in their own journey, and a connection of sisterhood and brotherhood they had with their fellow pilgrims and travelers. And they'd be staying in little pensions and albergues, little hostels, but also in these open air places that are set up with the clamshell symbol, where you could just crash under the roof and light a fire and cook whatever food you bought in the town previous that day, and people sitting around the fire and talking to each other and sharing what was important about the experience to them. And I remember seeing these images, especially just these breathtaking moments of a soul traveler with a backpack and a staff in the distance, with the beautiful rolling hills of Spain going off to the horizon. And I remember saying to myself, oh goodness, I would love to do something like that someday. I really, really would. And then I, went to university and partied a lot and had a lot of sex and forgot all about it, right? Did psychedelics, forgot all about it. Started working Electronic Arts and making video games, went out west, smoked a lot of pot, forgot all about it. Traveled a little bit, went to Fiji the first time, and went to New Zealand and Australia, and started to get the travel bug, but still had forgotten all about it. Made my series Broken Saints, buried myself in a basement for 4 years, and wrote and animated and directed this thing and forgot all about it. And what was strange was that all of those moments led up to this one, which was winning at Sundance Film Festival, winning the Audience Award at Sundance Film Festival in 2003 for my series, for Broken Saints. Kind of started to topple over dominoes. It opened many, many doors where I started going down to Los Angeles every couple of weeks, thanks to being promoted by Telefilm Canada and having some connections there and meeting some agents from LA. And for a while, I was represented by CAA and then another large agency in town. And I was being brought down to be considered for projects, for writing and for directing, and just kind of like, this is the handshake tour. You go down, you meet everybody, and see if there's a connection somewhere, see if there's a good vibe, see if it makes sense for you to work on something. I'm like, oh my gosh, like these dreams of making stories on a big scale, they're finally going to come true. I'm going to make my mark. I would go down every month for maybe a week or two at the height of it, right? In about 2007, I was going down probably every 2 to 3 weeks to pitch stuff, to potentially negotiate stuff, to meet the who's who of the industry. And that should make any kid like me, or I was in my 30s then, so any person like me, pretty damn happy and pretty excited. The problem was I wasn't excited. I wasn't feeling any elation or joy over it. I felt, I just felt like something was missing. Something important was missing in my life. I had spent all this time and effort in self-discovery. I had lost a lot. I had learned a lot. I had moved a lot. Then I started to travel and feel this sense of expansiveness happening in my heart and my soul. And now suddenly I was spending the majority of my time for about a year and a half, purely focused on career and money and making a name for myself. You can't help it when you're in that type of industry. It's a pretty ego-driven place, and I became so obsessed with, feeling as important as people were telling me that I was. Does that make sense? I really became attached to falling for my own press, for ego. But then something strange happened. In, was it, I think January of 2008, I had, one of the last series of meetings down with my agent at the time. I think that was UTA. That's Ryan Reynolds' agent, and I think it was Angelina Jolie's agent, and there were all these other agents, and I was seeing people in the hallways and going, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm here. And I'm in my agent's office, and he's introducing me to the person he wanted to be my manager. And this was a well-known person too, who managed some real heavyweights. And I remember this dude, this gum chewing, straight in the tie. Hey, buddy, we love you. Hey, okay, so don't worry. When we get behind you, when we're ready, we're gonna make you the next Tim Burton. And I remember turning and looking at him and seeing this older lady, the manager, standing there staring at me, waiting for my response. I went, the next Tim Burton, what? You want me to be the next glorified art director? She spit coffee out of her mouth and laughed. He was kind of confused and thought, who the hell are you to say something like that? And they kind of looked at each other and nodded and went, oh, he's got a good attitude. We're kind of, okay, you got some balls. We're going to send you out. Here's the plan. Here's your plan for the next 6 months. And they started talking. And as they started talking, I felt this wave of heat rush through my body. Now, I've been sick for a couple of days, but I was keeping it in check. And I'm sitting in the office like a total douchebag with sunglasses on and this suede coat and jeans and boots. And yeah, it's January in LA. It's not that hot. It's like, I don't know, maybe 20 Celsius at most, probably about 18. But I start to sweat buckets as they're talking, and this wave of heat grows in me and settles in my head, and I'm getting flushed, and sweat is pouring down my face as they're talking, and their words are kind of dissolving and turning into this mishmash sort of Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. It seriously became this, and I felt this sudden danger of passing out on the couch in my agent's office in front of this superstar manager. I was about to pass out, and I'm asking for a tissue, for a Kleenex, and I'm dabbing at my face, and I'm taking off the sunglasses and rubbing the bridge of my nose, and I'm trying to pay attention to what they're saying, but all I'm hearing is wah, 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 and my vision is turning into a tunnel and then into a pinpoint, and I'm really freaking out now. And I close my eyes, and I breathe through my nose, and I exhale, and suddenly the world goes silent, and I hear this whisper echoing like in a cavern in the darkness. Why do you want to make illusions when you no longer want to live in them? I didn't completely understand it at the time, but I got the basic gist. That I was in the wrong place. That at that moment in time, what was happening with me was not good for me. And so the next day I hop on a flight, I go back up to Vancouver, and I hole myself up in my apartment, and I'm just, I'm trying to meditate, I'm hanging out with my cat, I'm probably smoking too much pot and watching too much Buffy. Yeah, that's a thing, sorry. And I'm thinking about my birthday coming up, where I'm going to be turning 40 in a couple of years, and I was turning 38 at the time. I'm thinking about, what did I want my life to be? Was this all for nothing? Did I waste all of this time trying to become this, big-time storyteller? And the Hollywood route, it was like, I don't know, you pull back the curtain and you see what it really is, and there's that disillusionment that comes flooding in. Like, oh, really? This is what it's about? This is what it's like? This is how I'd have to be, smiling, like, hi, how are you? What can you do for me? Because everyone's smile is loaded with that. What can you do for me? I remember being nauseous and being sick. And then out of the blue, my associate producer, my assistant on my project, on the big DVD project for the Broken Saints revamp that Fox picked up, she said, hey, I've got something for you. I'm just going to drop it off at your apartment. I'm like, cool, whatever. I'm just not feeling that well. She's like, okay, I'll bring over some tea and I'll bring this over with it. And she came by and said hi to my cat and, brought me a thing of tea from Starbucks. And then she gave me this little book. I could tell it was a book. It was wrapped. And she's like, Brooke, I thought of you because I know the stuff you like. So just, how about you take a couple of days, maybe even less, to read this and see if it sparks something for you. I just had a feeling. And she leaves. And so I, rip open the paper and I see a book called The Pilgrimage. Now, at first, that doesn't strike any chords. It shouldn't with many people because it wasn't that big of a deal. The book wasn't the big breakthrough for the author. What was the big breakthrough for the author was his follow-up to that book, the book called and known throughout the world as The Alchemist. Now, Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, he wrote that fictional story loosely based on his trek along the Santiago de Compostela. And The Pilgrimage, his first book, was basically a close to nonfiction interpretation of his actual journey on the way of St. James. And as I'm looking at this information, as I'm digging into the pilgrimage and his story and realizing who had written this and what it meant to him and how it was strangely relevant to me because he was 38 when he quit his record industry job in Brazil and decided just to cast it all to the wind and go on this journey, I realized this is a sign. It had to be a sign. And I went online and I'm looking up, Santiago de Compostela, Way of St. James, and I'm seeing these videos and these images, and I flash back to being 18 years old in the basement and seeing that 60-minute special on TV and going, oh my God, I said to myself I wanted to do something like this, and now it's 30 years later. No, sorry, actually then, so that's now. 20 years later, I could actually do it. I could do it. Okay. All right, so that's two things. That's me thinking about it and getting the whisper in my subconscious during the agents meeting, and now here's the book coming from my friend, a very good friend, who's saying you might need this might do something for you. Okay, these things are supposed to come in threes. If one more sign comes, I'm going to turn down anything those LA folks offer, and I'm going to do this walk, and I'll do it this summer. So here's the strange part. And a lot of you might be like, slapping your foreheads, doing a face palm, rolling your eyes at this moment. But a few days later, I was offered a gig to go and direct some episodes of a TV show in New Zealand. Now, most of you won't know the show. It was a niche syndicated show, a fantasy show at the time, a post-Lord of the Rings cash-in, based on a series of books that were kind of cheesy fantasy called Wizard's First Rule. And if you remember the show, it was from the same producers, the Sam Raimi, Robert Tapert group, who did Xena and Hercules, and it was a show in New Zealand called Legend of the Seeker that ran for, I think, 3 seasons. And they wanted me to come down and direct some episodes, maybe write and get involved in the whole transmedia campaign of the thing before transmedia was a big thing, the multi-platform storytelling. They're like, Brooke, you're perfect for this. Here's the offer. And that sounds great, right? I had no huge ties, well, other than my cat, of course, and that's another story. But I didn't feel like I had huge ties to Vancouver anymore. I'd been there long enough. And I was wondering which way my life was going to go. And this seemed to be like the best opportunity I was going to get with my limited experience and be able to like really kind of start to dig into the industry. Was this the path I was going to take? Even though I had heard that whisper, why do you want to make illusions when you no longer want to live in them? So I head out to a coffee shop the next day after that offer and sit there mulling it over. I'm reading through the first book in this book series to familiarize myself with it, Wizard's First Rule. And I'm just pounding back cappuccinos and Belmont mild cigarettes. And someone hands me the local weekly paper, the Georgia Straight in Van. And I'm flipping through and I just kind of grab it in the middle and I open it up and I land in the travel section, and there is a half-page article on the next wave resurgence of non-Christian pilgrims walking the Santiago de Compostela, and how it's becoming a thing again, and how people who are having a midlife crisis like me, or young folks wanting to challenge themselves, or older people wanting to strike something off their bucket list, are realizing that there's this incredible experience waiting for them that's not that expensive, that could be life-changing and wonderful and challenging and enriching. And I just read Paulo Coelho's The Pilgrimage, which spoke about how the entire journey was magical and completely changed his life. And then he wrote The Alchemist, and his life absolutely changed forever as it sold, I don't know how many millions and millions of copies. I think it's like, what, third or fourth after Lord of the Rings and something else, after the Bible for sure. And that was my third sign. 2 days later, I turned down the offer, and my agent and the manager were like, what the fuck are you doing? And I basically spouted the same thing back, what am I doing at this point in my life? Making illusions when I no longer want to live in them. I've got a spiritual purpose and I feel like this is my thing, and I'm sorry for being a hippie. I got to turn you down. I'm sorry. No. And I bought my gear and I bought a backpack and I did my research and I got a little guidebook because you kind of need those to do the trail. And I booked my flight and, flew into England and then took the train, the channel to Paris with an old girlfriend of mine, and then hopped on another train and went down south and ended up working my way down to the little town Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, the way of the foot or the gate of the foot. And that's where most people traditionally start their journey on the main path, the Camino Frances. There are many paths. There's the Camino Portuguese, there's Camino Norte, the North Route, but the main path is the Camino Frances. That's been used for 1,200 years. And you're in this, I just remember how incredibly magical it felt, how my skin was like tight and the hair bristled and the air felt crisp as it entered my lungs, and I'm walking into this tiny town that felt like a slice of Middle Earth or some strange medieval kind of time portal, with the little river running through the town and the old mill wheel at the center of town and the stone bridge, and that you go over that arching stone bridge like out of a dream, and you're walking along cobbled streets and people are having beer and wine and coffee and eating salads with fresh chèvre, and you're smelling the fresh bread from the bakery, and you're seeing like a blacksmith actually like hammering on stuff, and I'm going, is this real? Is this real? And you walk up to the highest point in town, to this hill where there's like a church from, I think the year, I think it was like 1100, and really low ceilings, and you go inside and you're supposed to ask for a blessing for the trail, and then beside that church, beside that beautiful kind of hollowed out stone and earth thing that you could feel the history in palpably, I came out of that church and I saw a white cat with blue eyes, and it was pawing at my leg, and I sat down, and it wasn't asking for food. It just hopped up into my lap and laid back, looked up at me, let me rub its belly, and it was blinking its eyes slowly. And there was that moment of communion where the rest of the world melted away. And I remember at that moment there was this girl from Hungary who said, "Oh, you have made a friend." And I look up and there's this, pretty handsome blue-eyed girl. I say handsome because her features were like, more defined, a little masculine, but quite attractive. And her eyes were this vivid ice blue, very similar to the cat's. And she's like, "Are you walking the way?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be walking the way tomorrow." She said, "Good, my friends and I walk the way too. Maybe we see you." And she goes down the block smiling and goes into the little passport office, the little pilgrim's passport office where you go in and you sit down with an old French guy and he gives you the weather warning for tomorrow, whether it's okay to walk or not. And then you fill out this little booklet, which is your passport that you get your stamps in at every town and hostel that you stay at. And you fill out your basic information, I guess, for records, just for the town to keep records of all the people who are walking, but also in case, I guess, if you get lost, because you can, or in case something bad happens to you, they can contact next of kin, which has happened. And that old guy just said, "So why do you want to do this? Why?" I found that so interesting. It wasn't just a case of, "Okay, so what's your name? Where you're from? What's your ID? Okay, here's your little passport. Enjoy your time walking from France to Spain." He was like, "Why do you want to do this?" And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm on a journey to find myself again, to find, love in my heart, whatever you want to call it, however cliche it sounds. I just felt like it was important. It was this moment of alchemical transformation again. The Alchemist, right? That's what Coelho was saying, that you make effort to change, effort to transform. It can be heat, it can be energy, it can be will, it can be force, but that energy, that intent is alchemical. It changes you at a base level, at an atomic level. And I remember setting off that next morning, a small group of us. We didn't talk. It was like 5:30 in the morning. The sun was just coming up. And there's this tiny bakery on the far end of town along the path. And that's right, the path because there are these stone markers set up along it. Probably like every kilometer, every 2 kilometers is a little stone marker with the tiny symbol of the clamshell on it. Or there's a blue sign, like I had mentioned seeing here in Germany. There's a blue square sign with the yellow clamshell, and the clamshell is oriented with like the edge of its kind of fanning tip pointing left, right, up, or down, implying that you're which way you need to head on the path moving forward. Or sometimes you just see yellow arrows that have been made with chalk or paint that other pilgrims have made to guide you along the path to keep you going, because you can get lost. I did get lost a couple of times. But overall, if you're paying attention, you get into this kind of meditative stride where you're seeing your markers to push you forward, and you just start your day and you walk. And it's 5:36 and you walk. You find a bakery like we did that first morning, and I got a ham and cheese sandwich and a pain chocolat, a chocolate croissant, and a little coffee. And I saved that for a few hours, and I walked, and it's slowly going up into the Pyrenees Mountains outside of town. You're into the countryside. You're going past farms. You're going past pastures, waving at cows. There are like herds of sheep and goats going by you on the path, and you're seeing the stone markers of little yellow arrows aiming you on, urging you on in your journey. And I remember it was about 8:30 in the morning, 3 hours later. I had walked the entire way. I hadn't slowed down. I was stupid. I had this 20-kilogram backpack on. Everyone else was like walking nice and light, 10 kilos, 12. One guy from Britain, even 5. He had done the path 3 times. And here I have 20 kilos on my back, and I'm sore, and I'm using this wooden staff and jamming it into the ground like I'm, I don't know, Sam carrying Frodo on my back up Mount Doom. Right. And I stopped to have a bite of my croissant or my sandwich. I was kind of hungry. And I took that bite, and I looked up, and I felt this warmth on my face. In the distance, the clouds had parted. This beautiful rift of gray and white cloud had parted, and there were those god rays of sun coming down on an angle towards the earth. And they struck the side of the hills, the side of the Pyrenees that we were walking up. And there was a herd of wild horses in the distance, wild French horses, galloping on the side of the hill. And the grass was swaying in the breeze, and the sunlight was sweeping across the ground, and there were these wooden fences kind of snaking down the mountainside towards the valley with these little stone farmhouses with wisps of curled smoke coming out the tops of them, and fields of wildflowers and butterflies and bees. And I'm standing there looking at this, soaking in, absorbing, connecting with, dissolving into the majesty of the beauty of this moment in this place. And I have seen some beautiful places in my life. I've been to some incredible, amazing oases of places. And nothing, let me tell you right now, nothing made me weep tears of joy like standing in that place on the Pyrenees at that moment of my life in late June of 2008, over 11 years ago, or around 11 years ago now. I remember thinking, this is what I would want my heaven to look like when I die. If it's true that we can make our own heaven for however long we can stay there, this is what I would want it to be. This would be my dream. It was so utterly beautiful. And I knew in that moment I had done the right thing. I had made the right choice. Now, don't get me wrong. There were hardships along the journey. I even wrote a script about it, but then Martin Sheen's The Way came out and it was like, too late on me. But I had adventure, I had romance, I had danger, I had outright collapse and depression, I had excitement and thrills beyond imagining. I had mystical moments that cannot be explained in any way logically, but that everyone else on the journey seemed to just accept were going to happen every day. I would meet Spaniards going, have you felt the magic yet? Have you had a magic moment? What was your most magic moment of your walk? I met people who had walked the Camino before and were doing it again, staying in different hostels and albergues every night, making new friends, drinking beer and wine, and sharing these magical stories of their journey. They had done it 4 or 5 times. This would be their summer vacation every year. And I'm like, why do you keep doing it? And they're like, because the Camino is the way we wish life was, but not how it actually is. What people kept telling me and what I found in my own journey was that on the Camino, on this magical way of St. James where millions had walked and thousands upon thousands had probably died in the process, all with that same focused will of, I am going to take this journey and make it to the end, and when I do, my sins will be forgiven. You could feel the sacred energy of that wish, of that collective wish as you took each step on the trail. And man, let me tell you, there were moments where I would stop and close my eyes and go, please, around the next bend, let there just be X. Let there just be Y. Let me have a cheeseburger. I haven't had a cheeseburger in 3 months or 4 months, and that would really just give me such a fucking high right now. And I would round the corner, and no one has cheeseburgers in Spain, and there's this guy out front in his yard on a grill making homemade fucking cheeseburgers. And he looks at me, and I have no Spanish, and he has no English, but he's like, and he's pointing at the damn thing like, do you want one? I'm like, yes, I do. That was moment number 1. Running into someone as soon as you think of them. We've all had that. You think of someone and someone phones. Having that happen all the time, almost daily on the trail. You think of someone that you had met on your journey thus far and go, oh, they must be really far ahead of me or far behind, or maybe they stopped, or maybe they hopped on a bus, and suddenly they appear at a cafe in the next town you walk into, or you hear them calling your name. Each day was magical. Each morning waking up, shaking off the pain of the long walk of the day before, because you're gonna get blisters. Hell, they have stations along the way where, nurses showing their respect to pilgrims sit and put needles and thread through your calluses and through your blisters and drain the fluid from them, and then wrap your toes and bandage them and put, some feminine hygiene products, a maxi pad in the base of your boot to keep your foot from rubbing and moving. They're like, that's good, bueno, that's good, that will help you. There was a fountain for just 2 weeks a year where the monks who made wine, they would open up this fountain for pilgrims, and pilgrims could walk up with 1 liter water bottles and fill it with wine. There was a lineup from 8 in the morning with people filling up their bottles with wine for the day. Where does that happen? How does that happen? You go into each little Spanish town and you come to a cafe and they slam down some tapas for you and a bottle of wine. It's Rioja from here, and the cheese from here, the bread from here, and the olives today. And I was on that trail right to the end. Most people stop in Santiago. Some go to the edge of the Roman road, Finisterre, the ends of the earth. The hardcore pilgrims go to a little town called Muthia on the far west coast, where the waves are crashing against the rocks in epic cinematic fashion, and there's an old church there in that spot to mark the end of the journey. And I remember arriving in that fishing town after 5.5 weeks, after 900 kilometers, after on my second last day walking 58 kilometers, and my feet had blisters and pools of blood on them, and yet I couldn't stop walking. I wanted to make it to the end. I met some of the best friends of my life, though some of them were very short, just for a few weeks, but some I'm still in touch with. I made some of the best friends of my life on that journey, but more importantly, I realized a bit about who I was at that point and who I wasn't. I was never going to be some shuck and jive LA guy. No matter how badly I wanted it, and no matter how talented I may have been to be able to execute it, it just wasn't for my soul. And at the same time, I've spent so much of my energy chasing external approval, chasing love on the outside of myself. I remember someone saying to me before I started the walk, Brooke, maybe on this journey with the magic of the Camino, you'll finally be happy. You'll finally, you wanted to have a partner in this life forever. Maybe you'll finally find the love of your life. And I remember the stages along the way, the romances that I had, the passion, the sweet love notes and the poetry and the stone symbols left along the trail, and all the things that would happen when you spark that early nascent stage of love, and thinking, this woman could be the love of my life. Hey, this woman could be the love of my life. And by the end of it, by the end of the journey, at the end of 5.5 weeks, as I had been rained out in the middle of nowhere and screamed at the sky, as I shivered on a mountaintop in Galicia and knew I was woefully underprepared and didn't know if I'd ever feel warm again, as I was caught in a lightning storm and I smashed my staff on the ground, and each time I smashed the staff there was a burst of fork of lightning in the sky, and I felt like, this is it, I could die now, I am ready. All these moments, beautiful and awe-inspiring and terrifying, at the end of the trail, when I was done, when I was sitting on the rocks in Muthia with the waves crashing around me and the stone church behind me and the sky parting and the sun shining on my face, that's when I felt it. I had found the love for my life, the love of my life. Not as an external person. It was the first time that I could remember where, with nothing else, with no external approval, without having to have anyone else involved, I was happy to be alive. And in that moment, I could have let it all go because it was enough. And so was I. I'm not saying that everyone needs to take a journey like this to figure out who the fuck they are. But I can say, seeing the symbol here in this little town in Germany and being reminded of how far I have gone and how far I have come and how far I have traveled and how many skins I have shed and how many blisters, both real and metaphorical, I have had accumulate on these old feet, it's been worth it. So find your thing, find your quest, find your grail, find your way, and walk it. You'll be glad that you did.